is Tony Haring. I am an account manager with the Cargas Systems team over here, working strictly with Sage Intacct clients, predominantly in the non-for-profit space.
Yes, thank you, Tony. So I am Eric Gennari. I am a 25+ year veteran in the human capital management space. I'm the director of sales at APS, HCM and Payroll. I look forward to the riveting conversation today and what Cargas Systems and APS have seen within the nonprofit space, the challenges that we've been able to help solve and see, even outside of our system. So, Tony, I look forward to the conversation with you and with all of our guests.
Eric, given your experience in this space, I'm curious just to start, what are the things you've been hearing for customers and prospects that are dealing with staffing challenges in their organizations?
Tony, great question. So staffing challenges have been at the forefront of nonprofits ever since COVID-19 hit about 5 years ago. Finding the right type of employees and retaining those employees have been a struggle for almost all organizations, but specifically nonprofit, which when you look at a nonprofit, the word nonprofit infuses it into it. So finding the best talent at a reasonable cost has been a challenge. You really have to be able to utilize several different networks, which being an applicant tracking system, going out through a LinkedIn, going through a Facebook. But what we have seen lately within nonprofits where they're finding their best employees are really from internal coworkers, and really helping them in looking at the vision and what the nonprofit is doing. Managing those labor costs is at the forefront of everybody's mind as the wages continue to go up, and it makes it challenging for nonprofits. But there are several different ways that nonprofits can look at this and solve that equation, whether it be from technology or really just from a grassroots effort.
Understood. And so when companies do start employing those methods to find talent, whether that is outside or internal, like you mentioned, what are some of the strategies you've seen successfully employed in order to retain those people and make sure that there's not more turnover and more challenges that come about?
Another great question. So the biggest thing that employees are looking for today in the workplace is growth, Tony, and whether that's growth from the position that they're in now to possibly a promotion down the road, but they're looking for feedback from their employer. They're looking for what they can do better. They're looking for communication. They're also looking, the biggest thing that I'm finding in today's workforce is they want to have a voice. They want to be heard. So they want to be pulled from the organization, the direction of the organization, or what they feel the direction of the organization. They also want to know, especially from a nonprofit standpoint, Tony, most people that work for a nonprofit, they want to know how they can help that organization more, get their name out in the community, get their name out across the nation. So again, there are several different ways that you can help with retention at that organization.
Just one piece of that I wanted to dive into. You mentioned the communications internally, being able to share out the vision and get these employees invested in the company so that they can see that vision of growth. What methods have your customers been implementing to effectively communicate those things with their employees?
So they've been introducing several different modes of communication. First and foremost, we all know social media is really at the forefront of everybody's mind today, whether it's Snapchat, whether it's Facebook, whether I forget the other ones that my kids use it, of course I don't, but those modes of communication to get their vision out to the community. But more so internally to the employees, they're looking for message boards within there to where they can roll out what's happening within the organization, what new procedures are being released, what new promotions are happening. And even we just talked about it is polling or surveys. That is one of the best ways for employees to communicate back to what they're feeling within the organization, the direction they feel the organization is going, and how they feel their worth is in the organization. And that's such a key important to retaining employees, making them feel that they make a difference, especially within a nonprofit. We talk about several nonprofits, YWCAs, and a lot of people that work there want to know the difference that they're making for the people coming into the YWCA.
Well, I'm sure we all wish that staffing was the only layer of challenges that we all experience. But of course, there's more to this conversation and discussing some more of these pain points that we see across the not-for-profit space. So let's move on to our next polling question here. Many businesses that we talk to here at Cargas, we find that grant tracking and reporting can be complicated. We hear frequently from our customers that there's a lot of manual work involved. There's going into Excel, there's going into Donor Perfect, there's pulling data between systems, uploading via import files to the ERP. Just a lot to manage. Eric, I'm curious if you could elaborate on some of these issues with reporting, with grants, and what does that lead to long term?
So working in this space for over 25 years, the first thing that nonprofits are looking for is that ecosystem, Tony. I believe you've heard that word from your clients before. I've heard that word from our prospects and clients before. How are you going to marry up tracking those grants, taking those grants, getting those back into the financials so that you're able to produce reports to stay in compliance with state, federal, even local level funding that you're getting? And what I've seen is, as I believe you have too, Tony, is if that tracking is not properly put in place, a nonprofit could effectively potentially lose that grant that they have. You're managing multiple different grants from multiple different sources. Again, we talked about state level, federal level, local level. The last thing you do is you want to lose that funding, because that funding is helping your organization outreach to the community. So the ecosystem is going to be key. So many people use the term integration. Tony, I think you and I both like the word ecosystem because it's not just polling from potentially Cargas's system, which is Sage Intacct and APS, but it could be polling from other systems also. How do all of these systems work together? And you need to find the right vendor to help you pull those together and really run your nonprofit as it is a business.
What tips would you give to somebody just starting out building that ecosystem from ground one? What should they keep in mind when they're evaluating different partners to add to the stack?
Really, the first question you have to ask yourself is, what do you want to track? How granular do you want to track that? Some grants have just the grant level, but some grants have sub-grant levels. How far do they want to track it? Do they want to track it by the hour? Do they want to track it by the day? What format do you need to have all of that in? Once you've uncovered what your needs are, my suggestion is then to vet out, 2 to 3 vendors to make sure that they're able to accomplish what you need. But even farther than just tracking those grants, again, we talk about that ecosystem. How are you going to track those labor costs and get those back into your financials? Not only once you get them into the financials to make sure that the nonprofit is financially stable, but then how are you going to get that reporting requirement to each one of those agencies? Is it easy? Is it automatic? Is it something that you don't even have to think about? because those agencies all have time frames and they have timelines to when they need that data back to adjust, the grants that you're receiving. So again, you have to vet all of that out. And I always say, make sure you look at the workflow of what you're doing. Cargas and APS really coincide together and marry these systems well together. But there are other systems out there too. They may fit your needs better.
Absolutely. I like how you went into the difference in the ways that some companies track grants there. Could you talk a little bit more about what continuous tracking looks like when you have this ecosystem built out versus the typical period end scramble to pull everything together?
Absolutely. A time and labor management system is really going to be the key to this. And not only does that work well, Tony, most people think it works well for the hourly employees because they're clocking in and clocking out and they can transfer between grants. But even from a standpoint of a salaried employee, you really want to make sure that that salary is allocated directly to that grant. Now, do you truly want a salaried employee clocking in and clocking out? Most organizations are going to answer no to that question. So really giving those salaried employees to where they can manage that on a day in, day out basis and say, I worked 50% of my 8-hour day at grant 1, or I worked the other 50% on grant 2. So really being able to do that without that salaried employee feeling like they're being tracked every minute of the day is going to be critical. We've seen to where hourly employees really adopt it fast. It's the salaried employees that really want to know why we're doing it. And once you give them that, in most cases, when they're in that salaried position, they were part of the process of bringing that grant in too, so they know.
Makes sense. And does APS, the system, does that include this functionality to be able to track and allocate those hours throughout all the various activities across different positions who might be users?
It does. And Tony, it's what we call dimensions. And we utilize that term dimensions because each pay has a different dimension, whether it's the grant 1, grant 2, grant 3. APS is definitely able to help solve those issues for nonprofits and create that ecosystem that they're looking for to make their lives simpler, because you're not able to continue to hire more and more people to help track these things. You need to do more with less. And that's what APS and Cargas try to help you with.
What size teams do you typically serve?
Great question. We serve from as few as 10 employees for a small nonprofit, all the way up to nonprofit with 1,000 employees. So our strategy is to find out what the need of the nonprofit is, to find out what systems that they are going to fully utilize. The last thing that APS wants to do is to sell a system that's just going to sit on a shelf and not help them at all. We try to maximize the dollar that they're going to spend and make sure that the system works for them. What APS is very proud of on G2, we have one of the highest adoption rates of our software of any other HCM software out there, which is very important to us because we don't want somebody to purchase something they're not going to utilize.
Absolutely. And that is something you do see frequently in this space when a lot of projects get taken on all at once. And there's not always the resources to make that happen, as we just talked about earlier with staffing. So it's really great to hear that APS is prepared to handle all of those kinds of different situations, unique teams, and unique needs. I'm more curious as well. What are some of the results that APS has achieved? Are you able to share for our audience a customer success story which resulted in significant improvement?
Absolutely. So let me look here. It is the YWCA Tri-County area, and they came to us with certain needs. They were with the current provider that was providing a good service for them. It wasn't that they were doing anything bad, but what they were really looking for, Tony, is they had just implemented the Cargas system, Sage Intact, and they were looking for that ecosystem because they were still having to use manual spreadsheets. They were still utilizing hand signature for benefits. They were utilizing it for the employee handbook. They wanted all of these systems to talk together because they had a very small staff within their HR and payroll department. Actually, they had one HR person and one payroll person for over 150 employees. So you can imagine they're trying to retain their employees. They're trying to accomplish this for the grants. They're trying to manage the system Sage Intact and get everything out of that it's able to do. But when they're having to create all of these manual processes outside of great technology, it was just causing them not to be able to spend enough time with their staff, thus the turnover. So once they vetted out 5 different vendors, they finally chose APS to work with Sage Intact and Cargas. And after about a period of, I would say 2 months, they were able to save over 15 hours a week by automating and pulling all of those systems together. They were even able to spend more time in putting events together that helped show appreciation to their staff, which was really what the HR department wanted to do. It was huge. They were able to focus more so on what they were doing and what the community needed rather than trying to get all of the data out to the different agencies.
And okay, so before we get into some of the questions from the audience, just wanted to ask you one final question for our conversation here. And that is, what do you think makes now a good time for organizations to evaluate a new payroll solution?
I always say with January coming up, it is always the best time to reevaluate your systems. I always ask myself, when should businesses evaluate what they have in place? And it's generally every 2 to 3 years. But with the YWCA, it was the exponential growth that they continued to have because of the community outreach program. So they were having to hire more and more staff. They were challenged to find the best of the best out there that they could. And they hadn't evaluated their system in 10 years. You've heard the terminology before, if it's not broke, don't try to fix it. Well, the system they had in place wasn't broke. It was just taking time away from what their true mission was to do, which was help the community, the women out in the community. So they should have, and they even admitted it, we should have reevaluated this years ago, but the challenge is the fear of the change. APS was really able to mitigate that and give them the visibility they needed during implementation, the communication that they needed, but right now is 100% the best time to look at a change. It just makes it easier on staffs within a nonprofit organization because generally they're 1 and 2 women or men shows that are getting pulled in different directions. And when you can do something with a clean break, it makes sense.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I know a lot of customers I talk to tend to struggle with that, right? They have a whole list of priorities, and payroll is very important. There's no reason it shouldn't be at the top, but finding the right time to dive into that and make those evaluations, it can be difficult. And I think you just have to take that next step sometimes, even if it doesn't lead to a change. At least you have more information to be able to better prioritize that in the future. And as you've shared, I think today there are so many time-saving efficiencies that can be gained with a new payroll solution, and even solve problems with low staffing as well as retention, right? So thank you so much for that, Eric, and letting me pick your brain there. Let's go ahead and see what our attendees have dropped in the chat as questions. So I have someone here asking a little bit more about the labor costs and how that is efficiently tracked within a system like APS.
So really, there are three different modes of tracking. We live in the technological generation now, so you look at still the physical hardware. You can still have the clocks on the wall to where you're clocking in and clocking out, and you're transferring between grants via the clock. Not the most ideal in a nonprofit setting because nonprofits generally are behind their computer. The first best way is really from the computer. You can lock down the clock in and clock out functionality via IP address. They're able to go into the computer. They're able to transfer from grant to grant to grant. They're also able to clock in and clock out. They're able to take a break from the computer. But the third way, which is really taking fire here lately, is via the cell phone. Now, you have to make sure there are state-specific laws on whether an employee can use a personal cell phone to clock in and clock out, but you're also able to geo-track for those hourly employees. But it also makes it so much easier for those salaried employees just at the end of a pay period to go in there and make sure they allocate all of their grants correctly. They can submit it directly from their cell phone. So really it's from three different avenues: physical hardware, laptop, computer, iPad, or a cell phone, Tony.
And we have another question here on compliance. What does APS offer for efficiencies in compliance? And then Eric, I'm curious what else you've seen in the marketplace.
So in terms of compliance, first and foremost, we take care of all federal, state, and local level employment taxes. So we take and bear the burden of that for our customers. We file and make sure that all of the documentation is there for our clients to be able to download and print off if an audit is ever done by a Department of Labor, Department of Revenue, federal. So they have that. So that's the first piece of compliance that we do take off. The second compliance piece is really on those grant trackings. Be able to export that information out or be able to generate an automatic email of that report to a federal, state, or local level so that they can see where the grant tracking is, what labor dollars are going into that, even bringing it into a Sage Intact and even seeing farther beyond just the labor dollars, but what other dollars could be going into that. So generating that for the compliance, and number one, retaining that grant. Tony, that is the first thing that I try to make sure nonprofits do. Is losing a grant is always tough for any nonprofit. So if we can help them stay in compliance and continue to keep that grant and continue to provide the support to the community that they're in, that's where APS feels best. We are very ingrained in our communities also, so we know what they go through. In terms of the second question is, I would say at the forefront of everybody's mind today really is going to be employees' accessibility, being able to change filing status, being able to see what their benefits are, and being able to do that at a reasonable cost. You know, making sure that they're in the technological generation to where you can see what benefits you have. You can download your insurance card. You can make sure you can see your pay statements. You're going to get a loan. So really having the accessibility at their fingertips for an employee is critical in today's HCM world.
What have you heard about, and this is our last question as I see we're running low on time here. Does learning management mean anything to you? And are your customers using learning management tools to help improve compliance and some of these internal initiatives that you mentioned to ensure you can keep those grants and continue to operate effectively?
Absolutely, Tony. So I'm glad you used the buzzword learning management system. It is at the forefront of almost every HR professional's mind today. Whether it be from just a compliance standpoint in terms of learning management, sexual harassment, state-based programs that they have to go through, but also in terms of creating your own learning management system, how to track the grants, why you're tracking the grants. And in some cases, if you are working on those grants, you may need to be trained on something to be able to perform that grant. So we've helped clients put in place not only standard learning management systems, but also customized learning management systems. We work with a lot of zoos across the nation, and a lot of those have very rigid guidelines and programs that they need. They're all nonprofits. We have one of the best learning management systems out for zoos within the nation. You know, it has been just impactful for those organizations not to only have the accessibility to those programs and not have to create every single one of them. They still have to create some that are specific to their needs, but just to have accessibility to that is huge for them.
Well, I certainly have learned a lot from this call. I hope our attendees feel the same. But if there's any part that you missed, whether you came in late or would just like to hear Eric's thoughts again, we will be sending out this recording to everyone who attended today. And please refer to that slide we have up on the screen. You're welcome to contact myself and Eric if you're interested in anything we talked about today, whether that's APS as a payroll system or some of these tangential products part of that greater ecosystem. We hope everyone got something out of it, and we will see you next time. Have a great day.
Have a great day.